Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us again with the ASBN's new event, SustainabiliTEA with ASBN. I hope you've got a beverage of some form with you too. Here's mine. Thanks again, everyone. So my name is Tyler. I'm one of the ASBN steering committee members. We're also co-hosting this session today with Europe Lab's another co-host, ASBN steering committee member. Before kicking off, I'll just hand over to Yara, who will present us with an acknowledgement of country. Thanks, Yara.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And we are meeting today on the Ghana land, also known as Tanzania. We'd like to say Nina Mani to everyone. Thanks for joining us, and we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land. We pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. And in particular, we want to acknowledge the amazing relationship and knowledge of the Ghana people with this country. And country, as you know, includes not just the land, but also the people, natural environment, everything we see and touch and feel around us. It's a very deep spiritual connection. And it's, I think, the most amazing example of systems thinking on the planet. So we're very privileged to share this country with these amazing people, and we have so much to learn from them. So hopefully the conversation today will expand on that approach. And I'll hand over to Phil without further ado to expand our horizons. Thank you, Phil, for joining us, and thanks for your presentation today.
Yeah, look, thanks, Yara. I really appreciate that. So, look, I mean, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we meet on today and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And yes, obviously, we meet on the land of the Ghana people today, and we really acknowledge what they've been through over the past couple of centuries. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a journey into One Planet Living and where we came from. Bioregional has been championing One Planet Living for 25 years. It's come from the UK. The CEO, Sue Riddleston, has been, I suppose, a green advocate for a very long time. One Planet Living has been adopted in some ways by the UN. It started off with BedZ, which was a zero energy development in the UK. It had 82 homes. Was built from 2000 to 2002. The aim of BedZ was to see if we could actually live within the means of one planet. And a keen resident could get to around about 1.7 planets. So that's pretty good in terms of what was happening in 2000, 2002. Very much the start of Bioregional and One Planet Living. You know, typical sort of things like high quality lifestyles, active transport, car sharing, electric vehicles, local food, and renewable energy. And it was about building a community. So the idea of real neighbourliness, being able to share things, having a social community as well as an economic community, and also in terms of the environment in which it was developed. At the end of that, so they did a bit of benchmarking. They found out that they could 27% less energy, 36% less gas, 61% less water, 53% less travel through carbon, about £1,400 saved in terms of bills per year. So the impacts were starting to come if this is potentially the way of the future. The vision for One Planet Living is a world in which people everywhere can lead happy and healthy lives within the environmental limits of our one planet. And the mission is to create places, products and service which make One Planet Living easy, attractable and affordable. So universal framework framed by 10 principles: health and happiness, equity and local economy, culture and community, land and nature, sustainable water, local and sustainable food, travel and transport, materials and products, zero waste, zero carbon energy. And I suppose what's really important is about One Planet Living is about creating that world where we meet our needs from local, renewable and waste resources, enabling people to live happy, healthy lives within the natural limits of the planet, leaving space for wildlife and wilderness. I think it's really important to understand that One Planet Living as a concept and as a term, it's a open license, so anyone in the world can actually download this and start their One Planet Living journey. It also has been mapped against the Sustainable Development Goals. And so what we're able to do is, instead of trying to meet all 17, we're saying that if you're actually addressing something like One Planet Living, then in some ways you're touching all the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's an effective tool in that respect to meet those needs. And then in terms of where it can be applied, so cities and regions, companies and organisations, communities and destinations and schools. So you can actually take a multi-sector approach to the use of the framework. In Australia, you know, and even in South Australia, we've had two significant developments by government, which I was actually involved in some ways. Lockhill Park was actually benchmarked against BZ. So it looked at the One Planet Living guidelines and then said, well, can we do better than that? And the first resident moved in that 2008 and was completed in 2018. A lot of you would be aware of that. And then Bowden Urban Village, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail, was actually planned on the One Planet Living principles in 2009. So it's already got a heart within South Australia. And then Westwick was the Eco Village in 2012, which actually became the first endorsed One Planet Living project. Bowden was really an initiative that was aimed at helping communicate the challenges that were faced in reducing our environmental impact, and therefore a crucial catalyst towards a global movement towards sustainable communities. But the other thing about Bowden, it really linked into things like cities as water catchments and Green Star communities as a pilot, which is now morphed into, I suppose, Green Star communities and become a low carbon precinct under the CRC for low carbon living. And I think what's really important is that OPL was the driver for the master plan. It then was inserted into the urban design guidelines using those principles, and then drove the outcomes that ended up being that community. In terms of the actions, I mean, what One Planet Living is, it's actually an empowerment process. It's actually a conversation that starts is what is the outcomes that we're after against the kind of 10 principles that exist. So then it was looked at, you know, what are the kind of targets that we might use in the master plan, and what would then be the development approach that occurs as a result of that. I went back, I did a presentation in the Livable Cities Conference in 2019, I think it was, and I actually tried to get a sense of how much the One Planet Living principles had actually been achieved. And when I went through this, I mean, Bowden's actually quite a remarkable product, even though it now has Green Star communities as its rating. It's achieved most of what it set out to do based on the One Planet Living principles. And I think that's an achievement in itself. And people will know that if you've been down to Bowden, you can actually see that community around Plant 4. So this was the master plan. It came from an old, as you know, an old industrial area, and it's really kicking goals in terms of what it's doing. Internationally, and I think, you know, what I wanted to do is to give you a bit of a wild fly through of some of the developments that are happening worldwide. So you can see around the world, there's significant impact of One Planet stories. Bioregional Australia works with Bioregional in the UK. We're in the process of signing a 10-year agreement to run One Planet Living across Australia and the Oceanic region. We're a small not-for-profit, and, you know, we want to build the Oceanic Australian stories into this world of One Planet stories. In Australia, we've got examples in East Village at Knutsford, Marrican Cove, Salt Torquay, Evermore, Whitegum Valley, and then Kundal as an organisation. All these things are actually happening. A lot of that's happening in Western Australia. Some is happening in Victoria, and some is happening in New South Wales. We don't have a lot of work that's happening in South Australia at the moment, and hopefully this is the beginning of that conversation and that story. In 2019, the Bioregional started developing One Planet Cities, and they started to take this framework out with the help of the KR Foundation grant to go into Canada, Durban in South Africa, develop Oxfordshire in the UK, and one Brighton in the UK. And so working with local authorities and communities, developing action plans and shared visions. So I'm just going to give you a couple of looks at a couple of these, and some of these are really quite inspirational. So Les Villages Naturales in Paris is a holiday home in Euro Disney. It's the world's first One Planet resort, and it inspires the United Nations to a different future. So it actually really gives us a picture of the way the future could look. And then Singata in Serengeti is a wildlife reserve in Tanzania. committed to sustainable tourism, wildlife and conservation and community outreach. So let's just have a look at Villages Naturales in France, large scale resort. It's One Planet Living community, endorsed by Bioregional and opened in 2017. It connects its guests through a range of activity, geothermal, energy, extraordinary gardens, more than 25,000 trees. The resort is only accessible by public transport. So once you get there, you have to get there by public transport, and you cannot use. You can use electric buses, you can use bikes, you can get you walk, but that's about it. All the rest of it has to be is electrified or through your own energy. So it's really quite an exciting place to be. So it's high end, high energy, but it's also a really good look at what the future could be without reducing our impact, or without impacting our planet. And, you know, one of the directors, you know, since the inception of the project, One Planet Living has helped us design and fine-tune a unique concept for tourism resort based upon sustainability. Drives the project with clear and ambitious goals and guides our decision throughout the development and construction process. So it starts from the beginning of the master plan all the way through construction, but also in terms of how people live or how people enjoy that destination. So it embeds it from day one, has a green construction charter and monitoring, and then builds capacity. So one of the things that happens with One Planet Living is not only is the framework, it actually helps to build the capacity of people that are working in the development. So there's like an induction system of, you know, what we're trying to do with One Planet Living, and then that helps to permeate all the way through, including the finished product of people that work there. And Singatar and the Serengeti in Tanzania is really quite unique. This is Ben Gill. Ben is the, I suppose, the technical coordinator of One Planet Living across the world. Very inspirational guy. And this is what One Planet Living looks like. It starts to go through a process where you go through an analysis, you develop your action plan, and then you get to try and deliver on that action plan over time. It's not we've finished it here, we've ticked that box, and then we move on because we've already got that. It's a continuous improvement process. So it's about a journey. So they develop some goals, some key strategies, and then they track their progress against that. And I'll talk about that later. And in terms of this, I mean, they're looking at things like zero carbon energy. In terms of a scorecard, so this is, you know, it's really and we've heard of these, the traffic light systems before, you know, green, substantially completed. Yellow is sort of you're on track for the long term, or red is that, well, you've potentially got some problem or you're struggling with delivery of that. And I think what's important is this is an open and transparent conversation. So not only do you think about the way that you do things, but it's also about being able to convince, you know, the assessors or the peer reviewers around the way that you look and the way that you feel about the development and the people that are there. And I think that's really important. So I'm just going to, the other ones that I'm going to talk about is Zibi in Ottawa, Canada, which is 2,500 homes on an old paper mill. And that's really important in terms of the way that they worked with First Nations people to actually heal the land first, heal the relationship, and then start with the development. I think Australia can learn a lot from that. We know that there's been land healing ceremonies with some of the developments in Australia, but I think we can have a policy that starts to look at through reconciliation as a way of matching that. And then in Springfield in Meadows in the UK, 25 zero carbon homes in Oxfordshire, which is a showcase to advocate change to policy in the UK. And Zibi, I mean, it's quite a significant, we're talking about this island here. First occupants were late 2018. It's a development by Windmill Development, and it's located on the parts of the Ottawa River. It's zero carbon, so it's using waste energy from a nearby power mill. It's really engaged in the local economy and trying to create commercial space allocated to local business. So it's actually trying to create an integrated system in the way that the development happens and it connects with its surrounding neighbourhood. So it's not just about getting the development being green, it's about what is the legacy that gets left in the way that we do things. And I suppose one of the things that we talked about the First Nations area. This is how it's. This is the image of how it wants to look in the future. It's around cultural relevance, so culture and community is one of the principles. And so it's about how does the culture and the community of the future connect to the past, and then how do we adapt and reuse some of those industrial buildings that already exist there so we minimise our impact. And what was this is it's a new model for collaboration with First Nations. So it's really important to understand that we are targeting aspirations. And it's a journey. So it's a 15 to 20 year journey from 2017 through to 2032. And I think what's important about that is new technology comes on board and new ideas come on board and things that we know. The One Planet Living framework allows us to keep being aspirational in terms of what we deliver. One Planet Oxfordshire in the UK is delivering the first eco-town in the UK, working with Oxfordshire Green Tech. It's looking at 6,000 new homes with workspaces, etc. It's trying to recreate, and if you look at something like Lockhill Park, Lockhill Park is very close to a zero carbon development, zero energy development anyway. I think it's and UK's first eco-town. So this is really important. This is potentially the way of the future. Sustainable transport. I mean, these things that we know, but it's also incorporating things like eco-education. So it's not looking just at the development. So you end up with schools then in areas being able to take hold of the One Planet Living principles and use that as a zero carbon school, integrating it into the curriculum and then influencing those supply chains. Ultimately, One Planet Action Plans is about leading the change. This is a journey of discovery and empowerment. So you start with an analysis, you think about what's been going on, create a vision, look at the current context, work with stakeholders. I mean, you can say, well, that's what we do in a master plan process anyway. But what we're trying to do is to get people to understand that the vision that you create is the one that you're trying to achieve. And then you develop an action plan. You're the ones that research the outcomes and indicators. They're not told to you. So you work out what you can achieve. You develop those actions, you develop the action planning, you work out what the indicators and metrics. So you actually own this process with the developer or with the community in order to develop that One Planet Living lifestyle. And then there's an annual review process. That annual review process starts with the analysis and action plan, and you submit it, and you can actually be recognised as a national leader or a global leader. And I think what's important about One Planet Living is that not only do you do that and then wait until you review it, maybe a couple of years, there's always a requirement that you publish your annual review honestly, transparently, and it's globally available. And that's about you putting your heart on your hands on your heart and saying, we're trying as hard as we can to get to where we need to be. I've just finished with Bioregional in Australia, who I work for. So we've just developed a vision of what we want to achieve. We're a for-purpose organisation and a not-for-profit charity. We're hoping that over the next couple of years, we're able to build One Planet Living communities throughout Australia. We have a strategy which is around our community, our story, our programs, our partnerships, and our future. And we want to be known as a change agent in delivering the vision of One Planet Living through our actions. So why choose One Planet Living? It's a question. It's holistic with a balanced approach to achieving sustainability, provides authenticity in terms of its approach, and it reaches hearts as well as minds. It's globally recognised. It's about raising consciousness and inspiring people. And one of the things that I like about One Planet Living is that it also taps into other frameworks. So sometimes it uses a indicator, or it might use the Well Institute kind of approaches for some of its things. So it actually tries to take, it just depends on what people want, and sometimes those indicators from other rating tools are important. It's not trying to take over anything. It's trying to provide a complementary approach to what people do. And it's different because it puts people first, right? It's grounded in the reality of how people live their lives rather than box ticking, and we've seen rating tools, and there's some in the development industry that are a little bit box ticking, but we think that it's fairly holistic in the way that it's not meant to be a competition. So just so people also understand, I'm a Green Star accredited assessor for communities. So I have a number of hats when I'm doing this. So that's who we are, enabling people to live and work and do business within the natural limits of our one planet, Earth.
Beautiful. Thank you, Phil. Amazing presentation. You've certainly squeezed a lot into it. It's certainly a very big topic. I think we could literally look at this all day. Personally, it's something I find really inspiring, as you said, and it is definitely the approach that I think everyone in this room shares, that we need to have this holistic approach. And we did have some great questions from Trish. So Trish, if you want to start a Q&A and just ask your questions.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. We have this unique perspective here, don't we? And Yara, your introduction alluded to that, that we've got deep time on country knowledge wisdom. How might we, first of all, are there any First Nations led projects in the world where First Nations on country culture informs everything? Being on country, learning on country, you know, building, living, walking, working. That's the first question. So I'm going to double dip here. Second question is, if not, how might we, in our unique perspective, start to honour that and work with First Nations to learn and listen and honour that way of being in this. So drawing on all that we know about urban everything, but really then coming back to honour what exists. So I can see that culture, context is one of the first things, but I'm just wondering, is there a way of transcending that and bringing context on country first and overarching for everything?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question, Trish. First of all, I can get back to you on the First Nations-led OPL projects. I don't think there's one, but we're in terms of, you know, so if I look at the Serengeti example, that's different. If I look at the Ottawa example, again, that's different in terms of they're intricately involved in that, but actually having a First Nations-led approach. So it's about, and I think, you know, one of the things that we're trying to work with Bioregional about is how do we engage First Nations people in a conversation about, you know, one planet living. The second question that you asked, and I think it's really, and I don't know if you know this, but, and I only found this out yesterday when I was talking to the members of Bioregional, is that New South Wales government have just put out a guideline on designing with country. You know, and to me, that's the start of the conversation. You know, for me, I mean, and if there's First Nations people on the call, feel free to put your input in. But you know, the way that I look at it is, first of all, there's potentially a healing process with the land and the people and between the communities. Secondly, the Reconciliation Action Plan actually provides us with a mechanism. And thirdly, you've got to be really honest about engagement with First Nations people, and it's about ownership of the end outcome. And you know, and I think as there's the political side which says, you know, now we're still yet to listen to our First Nations people about the hurt, and we have to do a lot of work in that area. And I think the second thing is that we really need to engage them in the process of urban development, because we can learn so much. And I absolutely agree with you. You know, it'd be great to have a First Nations led development, you know, and then engage the community in that healing process. You know, it's a big question, Trish. I don't know if I've answered it entirely, but hopefully I've provided a little bit of context of how that can happen. And we are, so just so you know, that Bioregional is really committed over the next year to have a conversation with First Nation people across Australia around its Reconciliation Action Plan. And that's something that hopefully we can join that kind of dot together.
There was a question, oh look, it's from Ken, about the type of organisations that are best placed. So Ken, do you want to ask your question, or did I just ask it for you?
No, thanks heaps, Phil, for you know, starting the conversations around these, around what sort of frameworks can help guide decision making, because it's really important. And I think a lot of us have to understand how do we even tell other people around what kind of frameworks might be available to guide ongoing conversations. And I know that One Planet Living works very well with, long-term planning and to make sure we have that framework ongoing for decision-making, evaluation, and kind of have that circular feedback. So my question really was, well, it was more of like, can we talk a little bit more about what kind of organizations should actually be taking the One Planet Living framework into their decision-making process and master planning, or even governance models?
Yeah, so look, I'll give you a couple of examples. So definitely the community housing kind of approach, where we've got co-ops working together, where they're already in a system of governance that actually enables cooperation. So that's at one end. All the way up to, we've got the potential in Sydney at the moment for a development of significant size, over $350 million, to adopt One Planet Living as part of the framework. The biggest thing for me is not the developer, it's the community that ends up at the end. So we've actually got to end up with a One Planet Living community. So it can meet both of those spectrums. So it can be used for master planning, can be used for the development of community. I think for me, and if we take Kundal as an example, they've used One Planet Living for their whole organisation. So it can be used in that sense as well. Secondly, it can be used in terms of capacity building, so understanding. So that very much curriculum, schools based, and that. From a development perspective, I think my first point would be, well, what's the organisation doing? What are they really after to start with? And how does it fit their own values? Or is it just a matter of saying, One Planet Living, if we do this, then we've got a global leader, but on the other side, we're just doing development that is business as usual. So, sometimes that creates a leadership opportunity, and you can bring that business as usual forward.
Yeah, but the other thing that I thought I'd just acknowledge is that no matter what, whoever can take this on board is great, but someone's going to have to instigate it and make sure that it's part of essentially almost like the constitution of how things are gone about, and I guess that becomes like an interesting conversation, and anyone else can jump in on their thoughts on this, but I really think it's really important that if it's not embedded in terms of almost like the bedrock of how decisions are being made, whether it's organizational or even if it's just for for development, like even a single building development or even like a precinct development, like if it's not embedded in almost like the bedrock of how decisions are made in the governance, then we see that a lot in a lot of sustainability bits and pieces. Like even I'm just projecting myself, but I'm like kind of thinking, if there's any sort of like bigger precinct developments, or even like councils, or even big land asset owners, like they should really be thinking about how does this come into their decision making.
So Ken, we do have a builder here in the room, and I might just throw Kila under the bus and say, Michael K. Martin, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. And if Sarah's have any views on this, that would be great to hear. But you can take a minute to think about this, because we've got a question from Gil Armstrong. So Gil, if you want to just unmute yourself, ask your beautiful question, and let's see what Phil can come back with and on existing or refurbishment of existing buildings.
Hi, Phil. That was fab. My kind of interest in sustainability is reuse. I know the eco town that you mentioned that did really push sustainability in the UK to the best level it could was built on greenfield land, and it's kind of not connected into public transport, etc. So my interest is really using the One Planet model for areas that are already connected in, but are perhaps now obsolete, such as brownfield sites, or even now commercial office buildings in the wake of COVID vacancy. So my question really is around how does One Planet tie into existing buildings that are perhaps now obsolete?
Great question. So there's a project in Victoria, Young Husband, which is using a heritage building, an old industrial building, and using the One Planet Living framework to retrofit and develop that as a community. So as one example of being able to do that. So once you've got the framework, it's adapted to the circumstances that you want to use it. So if I took a retrofit of a building at the end of the day and said, well, look, what have we got? How can we use the principles? How can we work with people that want to live in that building or want to, if I took, in some respects, Bowden was as a precinct was a reuse site. Tonsley was a reuse site. So, Tonsley could easily have been a One Planet Living area. So I think that it's ultimately reuse is where we need to be. We need to reuse our old spaces. Even if you looked at Lockhill Park, it used the footprint that was already there and improved on it. So, we can do great things with development. We just need to have a little bit, you talk about government policy, but it's also about community driving that as well. So I don't think I've answered your question properly as much as I'd like, but it absolutely can be used in look, West Wywick was an old, as an example, was an old primary school, and they fought very, very hard to keep that old school and then develop it into a residential area and use that without losing the culture and the heritage that sat around that school. So it can actually be done.
Well, that's great to hear that you can apply that framework, and it has been done. You've got some good examples there. Because my concern is that adaptive reuse is often used to create like slum developments, because they do it on the cheap and they create these like little, they can get better profit returns, but it's not done on sustainability grounds or for community benefit. So it's great that that framework can be applied. Thank you.
All right, and we've got time for one more question from Alexander Hendon. Alex, take us away.
Hey, thanks for everything. It's been really so we don't build things. We solar panels, solar systems, but we've got a business that's very keen on being sustainable even beyond that. So how might we apply it? We're looking at, carbon neutral certification would be kind of ridiculous for us. We've got 40 staff. We installed like 8 megawatts of solar last year. We are carbon neutral. And I've seen a lot of carbon neutral certification, which I think is bull crap. So this seems a little bit more holistic than that. So how might we use it in a business?
Yeah, look, so, first of all, I think the one thing that One Planet Living does is engage. So as a business, engages everyone within your business, right? First of all. So that's the first thing. Secondly, there's a process which says, zero carbon or sustainable water. Well, it's up to the group to work out what does that mean for you as an organisation. So as an organisation, you can take One Planet Living and become a One Planet Living organisation and have all those other aspects of how an organisation runs that fit into that. The other thing is that in terms of improving the supply chain of what you're doing, who you're working with. So I have a company at the moment that is really keen not only just to create a One Planet Living community, but to actually create a One Planet Living supply chain. And so it's about how you can go out from what you do. So it's what you're known as, but then, how else can you influence those that you interact with and, drive change? So it's possible to have a One Planet Living organisation and everyone is on the same track. What some people have found with these, with building the capacity of people that are involved in One Planet Living is they take the ownership of it. And so suddenly instead of it being driven from the top, it's driven from everywhere. And I think for me, that's part of the difference of what happens. And because the KPIs that come out of that, everyone's responsible for those KPIs, not just the sustainability person, and having been in an organisation that the sustainability person is responsible for everything, and then you have to, it's just like a fight rather than a friendship and a neighbourhood. That's a part of the journey of One Planet Living.
I think it's actually a really crucial point, because it's like we've got guys working on site and they can either go, cool, I'll just cut all the stuff up, it's quick, it's easy, I get lots of waste, I don't care, or actually I'm going to gather it all, minimize waste and recycle it. And I can't mandate that. I can't do a procedure for that. I need to think about it. So like they ground up. That's good.
Yara, Tyler, can I jump in with a couple of comments on this one?
Oh yeah, we might let you abuse your privileges then. The head of the ASBN, sure.
No, that doesn't give me special privileges. I thought that was a really good discussion point, Alex, that you brought up, because it does become like this, it becomes like a confusion almost in like the marketplace, especially for like businesses, on how to actually acknowledge their sort of like sustainability credentials. And Phil, chime in at any time, but what we found is that, full disclosure, I work for D-Square Consulting, so a carbon neutral rated organization. That's why I said shots fired. But what we found is that a lot of organizations, One Planet Living can be a little bit too much to comprehend at one time, because it's extremely holistic. So I think for a lot of us that want to perpetuate sort of regenerative design or regenerative businesses, or positive impact, I think One Planet Living, and even to a certain degree, even like the Living Building Challenge and Living Product Challenge and stuff like that, those are the things that resonate to people that really want to get on the regeneration train. Be like, going full force forward, we're taking opportunities to add value. However, a lot of the marketplace at the moment is really about what can I do to just reduce our environmental impact. Now, that was a conversation that we were trying to have like 30, 40 years ago, and now they're catching up. So it's almost like the gateway drug is carbon neutrality. And then from there, it might actually, because once you get your head around that, it's easy to get your head around B Corp. And once you're all around that, then you're like, yeah, I'm ready to become a One Planet Living. So that's almost like the stepping stone, so to speak. So if you want to take like, I don't know how you feel, Phil, but like to me, it's like, if you want to dip your toes in the water as a business, you should probably think about doing a carbon account first, because that's the lowest common denominator. And then the stepping stones later on.
Yeah. So, in terms of the 10 principles, I mean, so yes, you have to do the 10 principles, but it doesn't have to be complicated. I mean, the question is, who doesn't want health and happiness? Who doesn't want to support their local economy? Who doesn't want to have sustainable? So when you start talking about those kind of things, take away the point that we're creating this sustainable drive. And it is about scale. So, from a small kind of group thing or personal, it's about reducing your impact, and it's every little step you take. So, if you want to be, you can go on a One Planet Living journey and go, oh, look, I can do this, this, and this. Yeah, well, we're pretty much there anyway. And, maybe zero carbon is not something we can get to yet, but let's go on the journey to get there. And we can start with, what does that mean for us? And it might be a simple thing like, I'm going from gas to electric. That's the step that you take. So I think the one problem with something, and no offense to B Corp or carbon neutral certification, is it just deals with a particular issue, right? And yet there's all these other things out there that people have to deal with. Whether I'm going to get paid this week, or whether I have a job, or what's my relationship with my family, what's my relationship with my community, how does it, how do we fit those things in? And part of this is about developing a lifestyle. And so for me, those things, yes, they fit in. And even when I looked at B Corp myself, and I went, that's pretty complicated to start the journey, and it doesn't work for sole traders very well. So be certified. So, I think it's horses for courses in some ways. And right now, climate change is pretty high and carbon is the issue. And so people go for carbon neutrality. And even if you look at the declaring a climate emergency, in all the councils that have declared climate emergencies, organisations that have declared climate emergencies, you then go, what's next? And they go, well, we'll go and do a climate emergency plan, and then we'll do this, this, and this. But what have we thought about in terms of the community? And I live in Mitcham, and so they've got a whole lot of great initiatives that demonstrate what they're doing. But then if you go to their planning and say, well, okay, you're putting you're breaking up big blocks into double blocks or into quads or whatever. So suddenly the heat island effect is going up, and so the climate emergency is not being translated into the actions and decision making that they're doing. So, you know, for me, when you start thinking about things like climate emergency, it's really about you actually have to look holistically. You can't just go to, you know, carbon neutrality, or let's be all renewable, or, you know, let's demonstrate our leadership when the rest of it is not being affected. So for me, it's about, and you know, that's why I think sometimes One Planet Living can actually create resonance in a community, because, you know, councils have health and well-being as, you know, one of the strategies that they are involved in. They want a happy, welcoming community. So, like, you know, and I think, you know, sometimes it is a step. So it's also about the organisation. What ultimately do they want to achieve, or what do people want to achieve? And it's not just about being a greenie. It's about recognising your place and your connection to your planet and your community.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great segue to my probably last comment for the day. I'm sorry if anyone has burning questions, but we've got to wrap this up. Just got a message from Michael Kemartin from Sarah's. He's got issues with the audio, so he's passed on the message through me, saying that you know, he thinks the conversation is great, changing the industry perspective on sustainability and carbon neutrality, and he finds the One Planet approach really interesting and very positive. And it's a conversation he's trying to engage with in Sarah's and promote within Sarah's. So it's great to actually have one of our major builders in South Australia on board this conversation today, showing support, showing interest, and we really appreciate you joining us today, Keela, and hopefully, you know, this conversation can continue further on within Sarah's and within other builders and large organizations. So, Tyler, if you want to wrap this up for us today.
Sure do. Yeah, thanks very much, Phil, and everyone for joining us today. It's been some fantastic discussion, and thanks for those comments there too, and all the questions. I might just actually wrap it up on based on from Alex. His comment there in the chat is about how much One Planet Living is such a ground-up and holistic approach, and includes everything. And I guess we can sum it from Phil's last comments of being, yes, we can do some other things and some minor steps too, but if we look at everything holistically and then put all the steps in there in place to achieve One Planet really in the end, we can really make a key difference to, you know, actually make a positive and significant change and effect on our impact to the world and how the world's going. So much to leave it there with our final comments. So again, thanks so much for joining us. So guys, do keep in touch with our social media and newsletters as well too, to look out for our upcoming events. And we look forward to seeing you there. Thanks again, Phil, and thanks everyone else for joining us. Much appreciated.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah.